Continuing our Investigator discussion series, today I want to talk about my only other fighter in S tier. When I was discussing Lily Chen, I mentioned that I have incredibly stringent criteria for getting a fighter into S tier. The criteria that Tony Morgan meets, and only one other character does, are the following. First, you have to crush your role. That's obvious, you're S tier. Second, you have to crush your role beginning of campaign to end of campaign. You can't just be good with experience. You can't fall off a cliff after session 0. You have to actually be incredible at your role the entire campaign. Next, you have to be not Mythos immune, but so Mythos resilient that it's basically not a meaningful factor in how well you do. And lastly, the thing that Lily Chen fails is that you have to be stupidly consistent. As a fighter specifically, you cannot afford to miss your weapon. And Tony Morgan's Underworld Market plus access to Seeker Draw and Rogue is enough for me to say that he hits that. The only other fighter that is never missing their weapon in my experience is William Yorick. And today we'll be talking about why he gets into my S tier. As always, let's start with a character card, and you might remember this stat line from Rex because this is the fighter version. 3 in both Mythos stats, 2 in Book, 4 in Fist. And while the 2 in Book is obviously suboptimal, with the rest of the stat line being this well distributed, you can't complain. Like Rex, we have access to Sparrow Mask, except this time it's because we're a survivor instead of Dunwich Splash. And just like in Rex, being able to boost those stats to 5/5 means that any Mythos test we actually need to pass will have good odds at passing. Of all the non-Mystic fighters in the game, Yorick has by far the easiest time passing a Mythos test, thanks to Sparrow Mask and Hemlock Veil. His ability is reaction after you defeat an enemy, play an asset from your discard pile, paying its cost limit once per round. That is absolutely cracked. If you're playing, God forbid, True Solo or even Two-Fisted, you might go 1 to 2 to 3 rounds without even seeing an enemy, right? You just don't draw that many cards. But in 3 and 4 player, this is at least every other round, and frequently more often than that. It really depends on the scenario. But even with the generously negative assumption that you only see an enemy every other turn, half of a play action and half of a free recursion trigger as your ability is really good, and Yorick's ability is very, very frequently much better than that. His star is also great. The star matters the least on a character card, but his is very good. Plus 2, the number doesn't matter. If you draw the star, you should pass on every character. But if this test is successful, return 1 card from your discard pile to your hand. This is never used for assets, but there will always be skills and events in your deck. And even though Yorick is an asset-heavy deck, these skills and events we have are very, very powerful and very good to recur for free. Getting into his deck building, I've mentioned survivors lack action compression, at least for fighting in the past. Guardian 0 to 2 is the best action compression you can give a fighter, and this deck building is wonderful for Yorick beyond just the obvious good Guardian stuff because it allows him some very unique recursion tricks. Let's go talk about it. Getting into his starter deck, there's less powerful stuff going on with recursion here than there will be later, but it's still very good. First, we need to talk about Short Supply, the most important card in the game for Will Yorick. For a lot of characters, Short Supply can be sketchy. You discard the top 10 cards of your deck at the start of the game. That doesn't matter from a game theory standpoint, but it's absolutely possible that you're playing a character where you discard your most important cards and your methods of recurring them, and you would otherwise have gotten through your deck and seen all of your cards, and Short Supply hurts you there. I've had that on Parallel Pete, for instance, where I discarded the entire difficulty 0 archetype and all copies of Resourceful that my deck had. I was like, oh, cool. Well, sometimes you try to get your traps, and at least the traps are still in my deck, but I won't be doing anything else. Because the whole point of Parallel Pete's Short Supply is to have a way of finding hiding spot and other traps faster by discarding them and then having Resourceful be additional hits to hit them, or by digging through your deck closer to them. However, in Yorick, he is the recursion. You cannot discard your method of recursion, and because you're recurring so frequently, Short Supply is very nearly draw X cards at the start of the game because your graveyard is additional hand space. When I say X, the number depends on what percentage of your deck is assets and variants, but on average, with 3/5 of my deck being assets, it will effectively draw, pseudo draw, about 6 cards every game as I slowly recur them. It will also discard something from my star to hit guaranteed, and let's get into what we're using the In the Thick of It for. It's just 2 copies out of Crossroads. Out of Crossroads is some of the best draw in the game. Fighters disproportionately love draw more than anyone else because even though fighters don't progress the game the way cloovers do, you're never drawing deduction, you have to find your weapons. So with Out of Crossroads being the best draw available to the character, I am using its Short Supply, In the Thick of It, to get that in my deck. Because while Will Yorick will absolutely be getting a weapon the moment he kills an enemy, it's important that you have a way to kill the first enemy. In our starting deck, we have Machete, Survival Knife, Guard Dog, Enchanted Blade, Vicious Blow. We have hits to do it, but if all of our methods of killing it up in the discard pile it can be really brutal to need to punch a guy to death to get the machete out, right? So at a crossroads for additional draw is still very valuable, even though we had that opening hand with short supply. Now, with all of that out of the way, what's the deck actually do? Overpowered Vicious Blow are standard skills for a fighter, where it's like you're running the bare minimum skill set. We're asset heavy, we're not going to be running many skills. Stand Together plus Scoffner's Catalog is our economy. Scoffner's Catalog is very valuable when you're recurring a bunch of items. We don't really recur that many. We can dig out short supply weapons like Enchanted Blades, Arrival Knife, and Machete. Bandages we can dig out. Sheriff's Keepsake doesn't matter because it costs nothing. Scoffner's Catalog is to some degree team support, and we'll talk more about why that's going to be relevant in our final deck. Sparrow Mask also can be played for with it, but again, it only costs 1, not the biggest deal. Unlike Bandages, you won't be replaying Sparrow Mask. For the rest of our skill package, we have Live and Learn and Lucky, a 4-fist character reliant on Machete. These cards go a long way towards making you safe with only 5 fists and a Machete, and Beat Cop level 0 really doesn't cut the mustard. Guard Dog is very, very good. It's a form of Testless damage, and for a lot of characters, like, oh yeah, it's a bit of Testless damage, it's alright, it's not like that good. But with Yorick, where I can take basically any amount of damage as I'm recurring Cherish, Keepsake, and Bandages, and I can pay for them indefinitely with Scoffners, and I can recur the Guard Dogs as well, this is very nearly unlimited Testless damage. Guard Dog is one of the best things you can use Yorick's ability on, and it's why I've referred to him as the Testless tank in the past, because he'll survive anything and balance the damage with Guard Dogs. Anytime someone talks to me about Thorn's Tommy, I look at Yorick and I'm like, yeah, but I mean, I'd rather play the good version of it. As for just killing dudes normally, Machete, Survival Knife, and Enchanted Blade is a strong enough suite of weapons to easily handle yourself in the early scenarios, and you'll upgrade this stuff pretty quickly. We'll talk about that shortly. Safeguard is the best action compression in the game. It is very frequently slotless 2-cost Leo DeLuca because you need to move all the time, and as the main fighter, you can trust that there's a Kluber next to you who will be moving when you need to move. I frequently don't cover signature cards like Graveyard Ghouls and Bury Them Deep because they're not super impactful, but I will mention that having Bury Them Deep is actually really, really strong. I think personally that anything players do to generate victory is not a balanced mechanic and ruins the game. I don't play Delve Too Deep in Two-Fisted. I don't see anyone play it at my table. We just sort of gentleman's agreement to not play it anymore. But Bury Them Deep is very much played anytime we get Yorick, and we all feel the experience in that campaign. This is actually very valuable. I shouldn't not mention it. Additionally, there are campaigns where you see the entire encounter deck multiple times, and being able to remove a non-elite enemy is actually value. Now, coming up to the experience deck, which is only 26 experience inside of our experience signature card, we start doing a lot more gross things. The most important upgrades are Survival Knife, because if you're using Survival Knife after getting hit, which you obviously can and will Yorick with Cherished Keepsake and Bandages, then it's going to cause you to be using your recursion on the things you're tanking with, instead of being free to use it on anything else. So Survival Knife getting the upgrade, giving it the plus fist, and making it preemptive is very valuable. It allows you to instead use your recursion on things like Beat Cop level 2 and Guard Dog level 2, and you're going to be buying 2 charismas to get 3 of them in play. The second charisma is very optional, the first one is not. You'll notice that our bread and butter weapon in this proposed final deck is just a machete, and I've often said you can kill Hasser with a machete, but you shouldn't. In this case, machete, despite being the thing we use the most, is not the important part of our fighting capacity. Survival Knife is an extra swing during the enemy phase. Beat Cop is a free action damage, and Guard Dog is not just free action damage, but free action engage as well. We get a ton of extra actions out of our assets here. Beat Cops and Guard Dogs are basically weapons. I know they're not tagged as weapons, I know they're allies, but you can view them as weapons in your deck. The same way that you can walk up to a 2 health guy and kill it with machete to recur something, you can walk up to a 2 health guy, punch him at 5 just like the machete, and then Beat Cop him. It's the exact same as a machete to get your recursion engine started. So those Enchanted Blades end up getting upgraded into Beat Cops with Charisma. That's the most important thing in the deck. After that, you want your Guard Dogs, you want your upgraded Survival Knives, and you start dealing tons of Testless damage and recurring Beat Cop and Guard Dog. The important thing to understand with that, however, is that, well, Scoffner's Catalog is our economy and you can't pay for Beat Cops and Guard Dogs. I said I'd be coming back to this. This deck is made with the understanding that your teammates are going to be engaging with you and giving you some of their economy. You're going to help them pay for their items with Scoffners, and they're going to help you pay for your teammates with things like Crack the Case and Falskian. If you cannot make that assumption in your campaign, this Lucky probably ends up becoming something like Emergency Cash level 2, or maybe Nothing Left to Lose level 3. Take Heart doesn't really work. Yorick's too good at everything to book with Take Heart. you'll frequently investigate a 3-shroud location, pull a +1, and be like, oh shit, and you get a clue instead of drawing 2 cards, and now you're down a card and really desperate. Which is fine on a flex or a clover to end up with a clue accidentally, but on a fighter who is looking for their weapons, that's catastrophic. So if you end up in a situation where you can't trust your teammate to give you the economy that you're giving them, then this Lucky does need to be something else, and in the starting deck, I would probably keep Lucky and cut Live and Learn instead. Additionally, at some point, we're going to end up getting Strong-Armed as well. Most of the tests we're doing for damage are melee tests. Being able to refuse the auto-fail when damage doesn't matter to us is very good. Action Compression is very good. Vicious Blow is here just because it's damage. And Vicious Blow gets better with Strong-Armed when you can guarantee that you're going to succeed by 2 and not risk the auto-fail. Essentially, the thing that makes Yorick so strong here is the recursion, the infinite recursion of Beat Cop level 2 and Guard Dog level 2. These guys are dealing Testless damage as lightning bolts, and the entire deck concept is these cards. You view them as weapons, and you make a deck that's going to reliably find them and reliably recur them. That's why I bring immediate attention to Scoffner's catalog, is because if your teammates cannot help you do that, the deck has to make a concession somewhere. That concession will end up being Lucky or overpowered, pretty much guaranteed. However, in my games, I've been lucky enough to have teammates that were rogues and seekers and team players, and they were happy to give me some money in exchange for me paying for some of their items. And I do want to make the point clear that while I generally don't approve of builds that ask your teammates for money, specifically for Yorick here, who is asking for money in exchange for money, right? Just like, hey, I'll pay for all of your item assets, just give me your crack the case. Like, it's actually not a net loss to your team's economy where you're placing a burden on somebody else, it just requires an amount of coordination. And I really don't have a ton more to say about Will Yorick, because essentially the thing that makes him so strong is that without a crossroads and starting short supply with the ability to recur anything all the time, he's just going to really reliably hit one of these 8 hits, Machete, Survival Knives, Beat Cops, or Guard Dogs, and start digging things out of his discard pile. I ran a campaign, I think it was Cyclopean Foundations, where Will Yorick was 3-man fighting. He's able to do it, and I was doing it mostly with Machete. In that campaign, I tried out Chainsaw, by the way. Somebody's invariably gonna be like, Yorick's so good with Chainsaw. Chainsaw's a lot of experience and a lot of dead cards, man. I'd rather just use Survival Knives. That's the thing with me these days. I don't really try to make the most powerful deck possible with the highest high rolls. I try to make a deck that's most powerful in the context of having the highest low rolls, raising the floor to a point where the worst thing the character does still beats the scenario consistently. And Chainsaw is a lot lower of a floor for the worst case RNG than just Testless damage, high draw, high recursion, Survival Knives, or Action Compression instead. If there's an argument to keep Yorick out of S tier, it largely comes down to saying that his level 0 deck is not a particularly good fighter, that without the leveled up allies and leveled up Survival Knife, he's basically just out here with Machete hitting guys. And yeah, his level 0 fighter is not that really impressive. However, I would also say that, like, with the exception of specifically Innsmouth, there are no really hard scenario 1 fighting scenarios to worry about. Innsmouth can be pretty rough. Maybe Yorick would struggle there, but a lot of why Innsmouth is so rough is the unavoidable damage that you get when you engage with deep winds, which Yorick is uniquely resistant to, right? I don't think Yorick has a weakness. He's not so incredibly powerful that he like breaks the game in half, but he is more than able to do his job as a fighter. He can main fight and carry his weight incredibly well, to the point that he is able to 3-man fight, though it's like pretty stressful. It's very hard to do it. But being able to do it at all is something that few characters can do. And additionally, he is so durable thanks to his good Mythos stats, Sparrow Mask, and ability to infinitely recur bandages and Shearer's Keepsake, that it's just impossible to see him failing due to the Mythos deck. Having a final deck that's reliant on Testless damage from Beat Cops and Guard Dogs. I'm not sure what's up and why these tooltips are taking so long to show up today. It's very frustrating. But yeah, just being incredibly consistent, Mythos resilient, Testless damage is the archetype. It's like the least impressive form of overpowered, because he's not doing anything huge. He's not gonna stab 6 times. He's not gonna fire a Gatling gun for 6 damage. He's not gonna find 4 clues at once. But what he is going to do is slowly, methodically chip away at everything around him. 1 Testless damage twice a turn from Beat Cops and Guard Dogs forever. The damage he takes never matters. The items he discards when he gets a Mythos, like a Crypt Shield that he doesn't pass, never matters. There's never a Mythos test where he's testing like 2 to 4. because Sparrow Mask with base 3/3 is just a very good place to live. If Slow and Steady were a character, I think it would be Will Yorick. Because for it to be a character, it has to actually be good, and a lot of characters that are slow and steady are also kind of shit. But Will Yorick is slow and steady, recurring things that he shouldn't have a right to recur. He's the only character with a good infinite access to Beat Cop and Guard Dog. Other characters try, but it's nowhere near what Yorick's able to do. Tommy claims he can do it, but then he puts them back in his deck and he has dog shit draw because all he has is out of Crossroads and nothing else, and the fact he's putting cards back in his deck is negative draw. Yorick has infinite access to Testless damage and infinite access to soak, and the cards, like, you don't need a lot of good cards to make that work, and his deck is nothing but bangers. The worst card in the deck is Lucky and Overpower, right? That is a great place to be for a fighter. I don't really have anything else to say. Like, I want to talk more about Yorick, but the idea is just so straightforward. You are recurring infinite damage that doesn't require a test. The only weakness of the deck is economy. I'm running a deck that trusts my teammates. You don't have to. You can cut Lucky for emergency cash. If that's still not enough, you really can cut Overpower for Take Heart. There is more economy you can run if you don't trust your teammates, but I'm running the best version of the deck where my teammates aren't assholes and also aren't mystics, I guess. But asking for somebody to be able to give you some amount of money is not a big deal when you're giving them the money back. And it's the closest thing to a weakness Yorick has, is that his deck can be very economy hungry. If your teammates aren't able to help you, your power level will drop a little bit, but not very much. Coming back to the tier list, I honestly think he's lower than he should be. I think he should be at least under Jacqueline. Jacqueline's ability is so cracked that, like, when people start moving above Jacqueline, things are egregiously out of line. I think Will Yorick's in a similar boat. The fact that he's testless is so important, but his scenario 1's relatively weak. Unlike Daisy, Luke Robinson has a similar scenario 1 where, like, yeah, he's good scenario 1. I want to say, when I say Will Yorick scenario 1 is weak, it's still, like, notably better than a Roland Banks, for instance. Will Yorick scenario 1 is not crazy infinite testless damage. It's still good, it's just, like, on the low end of what I expect out of an S tier character, and that's very much where Luke and Winifred are, where, yeah, the scenario 1 is good, but it's not deserving of S tier. It's what they do later that gets them into the low end of S tier. And I think moving him up above Luke, I love Luke to bits, but I think Will Yorick is legitimately better than him. Anyways, that'll be all for now. Thank you for your time. I've been rather Incoherent. If you've made it this far, then please do consider liking, commenting, subscribing. All that stuff really does help the channel grow. I really do appreciate it. And I cannot overstate my gratitude towards the fine folks supporting me, both as patrons on Patreon and as channel members here on YouTube. See you in the next one.